Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us here at Actigraph as we talk through some of our latest product updates here. I'm really excited about our short webinar today, and I hope you are too. Joining me today are Christine Guo, our Chief Scientific Officer, and Kim Reindrup, our Chief Product Officer. The goal of the webinar today is really to take a look at you as our customer and partner and client and understand the journey that you're on around digital health technologies and help you get to a place where you are going to be successful, where you are going to take ownership of the delivery of these digital endpoints, whether it's an academic research study or whether it's a clinical drug trial. And so today we want to talk about some of the tools that we've recently put together that we believe are going to be helpful in helping you accomplish your goals. And we're also going to talk a little bit about what we're going to do for the rest of the year at a pretty high level. I'll get started. Quick safe harbor statement. Anything I say today can't be put into contract. And I think that's pretty standard language, but we got to start there. I've already mentioned that I'll be joined today by Christine and Kim. And we're excited to have them. They're going to actually speak about their kind of respective areas there. I'll do just a quick introduction here. Shouldn't take any longer than 5 or 7 minutes or so just to go through really what the vision is. And then I'll turn it over to Kim Reindrup. And Kim is going to talk through our scalable data platform and what we're doing with CentrePoint. He's going to talk through some raw system improvements. What are we doing with the raw data? He'll remind you all what raw data is and why it matters and what you're trying to accomplish. We'll talk about some API improvements. Really, Actigraph aims to be one of the easiest partners to work with in the industry, and so I want to talk a little bit about what we've done to help facilitate that. Kim's also going to take the announcement of our CentrePoint Insight Watch version 2 and talk a little bit about what we're doing there, when that's coming, and what it looks like. And then lastly, he'll talk about our plans for on-demand analytics for our science team. Kim works very closely with Christine, our Chief Science Officer, and Christine's going to talk a bit about our enhanced library of digital endpoints. In particular, since we're just releasing this new temperature sensing within the CentrePoint Insight Watch, we're going to talk about that, talk a bit about how that plays into adherence and wear detection, and how we're developing an algorithm to help with that. We're going to talk a bit about validation on real-world testing data sets, and then we're going to talk about where we're going with data science and what that looks like. So with that, I'll just get us started here with the vision, and we'll go from there. So when we think about digital health technologies, we understand here at Actigraph your perspective around digital health technologies. We understand that these technologies, whether it's something that Actigraph makes or not, these technologies are exciting for us for several reasons. One, they really have an opportunity to improve the efficiency of how we do our clinical studies. They have the opportunity to lower cost, and they have the opportunity to reduce development times. And we know that's important to you because profitability matters and time matters. We also understand that these digital tools, more than ever, now have a great opportunity to enable patients to participate in the overall clinical trial process. Patients are at the center of everything you do, and we understand that it's important to gain and understand their perspective to really make them a part of this process. And then lastly, we understand that decentralized strategies, which have really been accelerated by COVID-19, can drastically improve recruiting and reduce burden. And when I say reduce burden, I mean patients driving to sites, patients having to come in for therapies, doctors having to be at clinic at certain times. It gives a lot of flexibility into that. But there are risks, and we understand that too. We understand that these are complex tools, and it's challenging when we're talking about wearable technology, for instance, to choose the right algorithm and the right wearable and put those two together. We also understand that you don't really have time for trial and error. With these tools, if you get started and off on the wrong path, there's a chance that you can waste time and money and damage reputations. You can damage reputations if you're a sponsor with your CRO partners, if you're a CRO with your site partners, if you're delivering to patients as part of the overall ClinOps team, damaging relationships with your patients. So we understand those are risks that are there. We also understand that regulators are hearing from a lot of different groups right now on digital health technologies. In fact, they've just released some guidance around that, which is very exciting. But misalignment there could result in missing approval for a particular endpoint. And then lastly, we understand that there are risks around site and patient burden, putting the wrong type of burden or a new burden on there that could damage those relationships. But we really believe that progress in all these areas are possible. And so we want to put you on the path to success for adoption and approval of digital measures in clinical studies. And that's everything we do is focused on that. And so today we want to talk a little bit about how are we helping to accomplish that. This next kind of slide here is going to talk about our roadmap, but before we get to that, I want to drop a quick poll question just to see where everybody's at here. So popping up on your screen now is a question, and you should see that, and if somebody from my team could confirm that they're able to see that, that'd be helpful. It says that you can. Okay, thank you. So the question here says, what are the biggest risks that you perceive in deploying digital health technologies? And option 1 is selecting the right algorithm and sensor or wearable. Option 2 is wasting time and money and damaging reputation with stakeholders. Option 3 is missing the target with regulators. And then option 4 is damaging relationships with sites and patients by adding excess burden. So if you could take just a minute and give just a few more seconds for everybody to chime in. All right. We'll go ahead and end the poll here. And wow, overwhelmingly, it looks like selecting the right algorithm and sensor/wearable combination is one of the biggest risks that you all see. And thank you for sharing that. So very helpful for us to understand. So we're going to talk a bit about how we can help you in that area in just a moment. Before I turn it over to Kim, just real quick, our roadmap, what does it look like around these topics? For the first half of 2022, we're focused on platform scalability, making sure that we have the ability to consult with our sponsors and partners around the protocol development and bringing analytical services for wearable data to our customers and partners, and having the ability to go to regulators with you to assist you in qualifying some of your endpoints. You see check marks next to those. Those are things that are already active in what we're doing today. We're working on the first half of the year launching a new algorithm library, upgrading the CentrePoint Insight 2 watch, which we'll talk about today, and then improving our adherence monitoring. Second half of the year, we're going to be really focused in bringing the science and the technology together. Several initiatives that are there to support that, expanding our cellular-enabled data collection. We'll be adding some new technologies that are going to really expand how we deploy our wearables and how we collect data from in the field. In-home functional testing, mirroring in-clinic measures. We'll be bringing new products to market around that. Expansion of endpoint libraries. So we mentioned the library launch in the first half. In the second half, we'll be getting a little bit broader with that. We're looking at the release of an Actigraph fit-for-purpose DCT wearable. I can't talk much about that today, but that's our goal is to have something in the market that is really dialed into these DCT trials. And then engagement with study participants to enhance retention. We know that engaging the participants is critical in ensuring they remain a part of the study, and they remain retained as part of the overall study and feel like they're a part of a bigger picture here. None of this is written in stone. I'll remind you of the safe harbor up top, but we have to set goals, and these are our goals and where we're heading, and so this is our plan for the year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim. Kim's going to talk a bit about more data and more scalable platforms. So Kim, over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. If you want to navigate to the next slide. So one of the things that Jeremy mentioned earlier is raw data is what we believe is extremely important. And the reason why we believe that is that if there are improvements later to algorithms, or you find an issue, if we are calculating things on the device and not using the raw data, you're basically stuck because you can't go back and recollect the data. So therefore, we believe raw data is the reason why we are successful and what we believe you need to have to be successful. So What we do on devices today is we capture that raw data. Now we do run that raw data through what we call anomaly filters. For instance, there can be issues with the device and if we get stuck in one of the axes on 8G for a very short period of time. And unless you're a fighter pilot, that probably wouldn't happen to you. So some of those things we would detect in anomaly filters and basically correct them. Now, the raw data, when we have applied it through those filters, has to go through calibration before you can do the data. The calibration is something we do with each device. So we make sure it's calibrated so you can compare the data across devices. So it's basically a normalization of the data so you can actually use the data to compare. So that's a very important step. So when we're talking about, or when you're talking about raw data, it's actually this calibrated raw data that you're interested in, because otherwise you can't really use it as such. Right, so after we have calibrated the data, we basically have the raw calibrated data. Now, what we found in our old environment were basically that we could run into scalability issue when we were moving from the raw data into epoch data. And therefore, we changed in December our platform to underlying technology of using Snowflake. It basically means that we get almost infinite scalability on the platform itself by processing power, because what we can do is whenever we get more data in, you can simply just add more raw processing power in for the raw data. And that sort of means that, as Jeremy said, one of the important things for us is to make sure that the platform is scalable and that you'll be able to get your data out, in a timely fashion. Now, the other thing that we have added in is when you want to get data out faster, you often want to get out, or at least some of you wants to get the raw data out. So we've created a new public raw API. Now that API needs to be enabled by studies. And if you want to use it, you need to basically change your code to integrate with our system because it's new endpoints. And you need to contact Actigraph to basically get that enabled. Now, what we are doing here is per sensor type, we are basically creating the raw data that you then can get a daily either Avro file or CSV file for. Now, it's done per sensor type. So that means that right now we have accelerometers or data that you can get, but as we're adding temperature in PPG and other data later, you'll be able to basically get that raw data the same way. Now, the advantage with this approach is from a speed perspective, it's basically we have already pre-generated the files that you can get notified that they are available via a webhook, and then you can basically use our API to get that data. That file is basically just transferred over the network. So the limiting factor for you to get the data out will be just the network bandwidth, nothing else. There is no processing done on our side because it's pre-processed data. And that's what makes this architecture so effective and basically make it so fast for you to use. That's part of the system improvements that we're doing, especially on the raw system, to make sure it scales in a way that you can use our system. So Jeremy, next slide, please. Now, as we talked about, we want to capture more data. So one of the things that we found were that with the CentrePoint Inside Watch, there is an onboard temperature sensor that with version 2, we basically make it possible to capture data via that sensor. Now, that of course needs to be calibrated, as we talked about, so you can compare between the different devices that is out there in the field. So we can't enable it for our older versions, but for version 2, that's basically when you'll be able to use that onboard temperature sensor. Now, we've also done other improvements to the watch. There is an improved watch face. So basically, it's harder to scratch it, and it's a more sturdy watch. But from the perspective of the accelerometer data, that is exactly the same as were captured on earlier versions. So if you have a long-running study where you want to mix and match between different versions, there will be no impact to the actigraphy data that's being collected. So it's important to notice that as well. Next slide, please. So this year I want to spend a little more time on that, because this is really what will enable Christine's team to give you new algorithms. So in a study today, when you are running algorithms, most of them are running real time because most of them are aware algorithms. What we're looking to add is a lot of what we call on-demand algorithms, where you need the data basically only when you're doing an interim analysis of the study or the final analysis. You don't need to run them real time. Now, those when you run an algorithm, you need to define what input does it need to get. Is it a raw data input file, for instance, or is it one of the epoch data, or what is the input that actually goes into the algorithm? That we will basically calculate or capture in metadata. So we know from the algorithmic perspective what input is expecting. And what we can do is we can put all that data together, push it into input into a container-based system. So it's basically like a file you push into a container. Then the program itself, the algorithm, will run in the container using that input. And then as you are defining the algorithm or developing it, you're also defining what output it would write back. Because it's container based, it will basically write the equivalent of a file back, and we have metadata that would translate that file into, from a metadata perspective, into basically a table structure, so we can have it as part of our platform data. So therefore, you will be able to use these, and we're not really copy them into each study, but instead we have a pointer back to a library, and it's actually a version in that library. So that means that if a new version is developed of that particular algorithm, you will not be impacted by that unless you explicitly say you want to move to that new version. Now we'll have a series of validated endpoint in our library that you can sort of pick from a menu saying, I want to use these in my study. But then we also have the capability of add new custom endpoints, meaning that it's an algorithm that is specific to your needs that you want to try to co-develop with us. And Christine will talk more about some of those things. Now, when they actually need to be developed, we of course cannot develop them in our production environment. So what we'll do is we'll create a non-production environment. The way we do that is that we take the metadata around each of the algorithm and we push that into a different environment where we also will do a copy of all of the actual code that is in the container. So basically it's a container library that will contain the information, basically code of how to run that algorithm. Now, then you will create a test study over in your development or QA environment. And that's where you can either develop a complete new algorithm that you then can push into the library, or you can create a new version of an existing library, test it, and then push into the library. When you feel that it's ready, it's basically been validated to you accept that this is the output of that particular algorithm, we can push it into production. Now, it won't impact the study where you requested that algorithm or that new version until you actually go in and enable that for that particular study. When you enable it, that is when we'll be able to basically see that data coming out of that algorithm in your study. Next slide, please. So I think we have some poll questions. Jeremy,
Yeah,
are you sharing those?
yeah, I'll share them. Before I do, Kim, first, great job. Thanks. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on. For the participants that are here right now, I just want to give them an opportunity. If you have questions for Kim or me or Christine as she goes in just a moment, please use the Q&A box at the on the Zoom panel, and you can type your questions in there. We'll take those and walk through those at the end. We should have plenty of time to answer your questions. Also, we're about halfway through the webinar, and so those of you that have hung on this far, just real quick, a special treat for you. At the end of the webinar, we're going to give you a chance to get something pretty unique, free of charge, and we want you to stick around for the details of that. But many of you mentioned at the beginning in the poll question that your biggest struggle was around choosing the right algorithm and the right wearable. We're going to offer something for you to help you there at no charge to you at the end of the webinar. So just hang on for that, and I'll give you more details. With that, Kim, I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll question. and it's around some of these topics here. So I'll read off these questions. So as you see the poll questions come up there, if you could take a moment to read through those and choose the best answer for you. It says, what are some of the biggest tech challenges that you have encountered or that you anticipate around DCTs? The first one is finding a sensor or wearable that fits the exact needs of the study stakeholders. The second option is underlying integration with the tech partners, ECOA and EDC. In other words, how do I get this data into my platform? Third option is getting data on time. We deal with this all the time, getting DTAs scheduled and out the door. Missing or non-adherent data. So what do I do about missing data? And then last is all of the above. These are all concerns of mine. So I'll give you guys just a few seconds to answer those questions. All right, about 10 more seconds and we'll close the poll. Great. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results here. And you can see that all of the above, I think everybody deals with these challenges around finding a sensor or wearable and integrating and getting the data and having missing and not adherent data. And what do you do about that? So, Kim, any reflections on those results?
I think that was pretty much what we would expect as well, because we know they're all big challenges. And if we look at number 2, I think that's finding the sensor that's very aligned with the answer to the first poll that we have. So I don't think there's any big surprises there.
Great. All right, we'll hand it over to Christine. Kim, thank you for covering this section on the technology and the new enhancements that we've just released. Christine, we'll hand it over to you to talk about Enhanced Library of Digital Endpoints.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I would also like to echo what Jeremy have shared. It's very interesting for us, and really glad to see that you all express the concern about the algorithm and some of the previous struggle, perhaps with the selection of the algorithm. And that exactly is what we're heavily investing at Actigraph, is to really expand and provide this service and support for providing this fit for purpose algorithm and help you to deliver those as digital endpoint. So in the next 10 minutes, I'll just share sort of really a little bit on the surface what we're working on, specifically focusing on what ties into the temperature sensor capability of the CentrePoint Inside Watch 2.0. And then I'll share a little bit about our vision as well. So next slide. As what you just saw from Kim's slides, that we have onboard temperature sensor in the Inside Watch. So why do we want to have it, and what kind of use do we envision that you can use with this capability? So next slide. So what really motivated us to add this capability is to really improve the accuracy of wear time detection, because it is fundamental to a successful deployment of remote and continuous monitoring using a wearable device. On one hand, we know that with wear time monitoring, this gives us the ability to intervene in real time and understanding what could be the issue with missing data. What I'm showing here is just a comparison of very similar studies, one with real-time wear time monitoring, one without real-time monitoring, and you can see that the participant with poor compliance or adherence is really much higher in the case when we do not have access to this capability. On the other hand, from a scientific analytical point of view, wear time is also a very important post-processing steps to make sure that we're incorporating the data and aggregate the right data for the digital endpoint. And here is just a simple reliability metric, the intra-class correlation, to show that across many of the top interest physical activity measurement, after we filter the data with wear time as part of the post-processing, we can significantly improve the reliability, which, as you know, is very important when we consider those measures as clinical outcome in regulated trials. So next slides. So as we can all agree that wear time detection is really important for successful digital endpoint, and how do we improve the way we detect that? So we now take a very systematic approach by first really going into the literature and understanding what is the state of art in the literature on this particular issue. So this is just overview to show that, you know, in the past, there has been various algorithms proposed for detecting wear time. At the beginning, it's EBOC based, and then recently there's RAW based algorithms, but purely on acceleration from accelerometer. And more recently, the scientists, the research community have identified the temperature can also really provide useful information for wear time detection. And there are deployment use temperature data only. And what we have found through this literature review is that by doing a sensor fusion between accelerometer and temperature data, we can really have the best of the two worlds and really improve the temperature data. So the next slide, I just want to share with you a quick view of the data from the CentrePoint, the Insight Watch 2.0. So on the on the left-hand side, what you can see is what we would call the sensor verification or technical verification to ensure that the temperature data we collected from the onboard temperature sensor on the watch is reflecting the true temperature that we would intend to measure. As you can see, it's a very tight correlation. And then on the right-hand side, what I'm showing here is just a case study to show how we are employing the fusion between the temperature data, which is in green, as well as accelerometer data in red here, to really be able to identify accurately when the participant are wearing a device. And consistent with the literature of this particular algorithm by Zhou et al., that we find the fusion methodology has better sensitivity and specificity in wear time detection compared to the temperature sensor data alone or the accelerometer data alone. So this is going to be the solution that we will provide as part of the Insight Watch 2.0 and the CentrePoint platform. So just the next slide, I want to kind of just quickly share with you, this is essentially represent the way we're building our library of digital endpoint, and really wanted to make it a very much a scalable solution, because we see many interests from many different therapeutic areas on the use of wearable device, especially in a decentralized clinical trial situation. So this is really the systematic approach we're deploying each cases, where, you know, we would start with a rigorous literature review to identify the state of art. And when the case where there has been successful validation of algorithm in the past, you know, what we would do is just simply implement them, validate them in the data set, and provide the documentation on why this could serve the need of a particular clinical trial. And in case where the literature has gap, we would work internally with our data science team in our own R&D capability, as well as our partners, to provide to close that gap and provide a fit for purpose algorithm for your need. So in the end, what we envision is that this framework would really allow us to implement and document a validated and transparent algorithm across different measurement areas, including sleep, activity, gait, scratch, etc., etc. And more importantly, this is also where we would need to partner with you, who are the expert in the clinical area, is to be able to demonstrate those algorithm is really fit for purpose for that particular indication. So I think that's all I wanted to say on the slide. The next one is our poll question, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Great overview. And in a moment, I'm going to give everybody who's watching still an opportunity to take advantage of some free services here. So stay tuned for that. Right now, though, what we're going to do is just drop another poll question out there. And so it should be coming up on your screen right now. It says, which custom algorithm are you most interested in? And this is a bit of a loaded question, but we're really curious around the stratus of what you're doing, and whether it's sort of a high-level general mobility measure, or whether you're interested in some specific measures. And so this will help us understand a little bit about our audience. So the options on custom algorithms are around physical activity, sleep, gait and posture, upper limb mobility and tremor, seizure, or others. And so we'll give that some time for you guys to look through that. Okay, just about 10 more seconds here for everybody to answer. It's like about half of you guys are there. All right. Good. So interesting results here. Looks like physical activity is the highest priority there, and I think that we see that also, right, Christine, in the industry and around the questions that we receive and some of the conversations we have. So nothing too surprising there. Okay. Great. So Christine, thank you for that great overview, and we do have a couple of questions, and I'm going to get to those in just a second. Before I do, let's just conclude here real quick. And I said at the beginning that, look, we want to put you, the client, our partners, on a path to success for adoption and approval of digital measures in clinical studies. And the way that we're doing that is by coming alongside you and giving you the right tools that you need at the time. And we understand that there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all. And so I hope what you see today is that we're trying to put ourselves in a position that gives you the maximum flexibility to meet the needs of your study or to meet the needs of whatever objective you have to get to a regulatory claim on your data. And so we're not doing this in a vacuum, by the way. This slide just speaks a little bit back to what Christine just talked about around our process of how we do that. And so we want to be very transparent around how that process works and what we're doing here. So our goal is to put you on the path, as I've just said, to achieve a primary or secondary endpoint in a clinical development plan. That's what we want to do, and we know that that's coming, and we know that that's happening now. In fact, Actigraph has participated, and our product was used in a pivotal phase 3 in 2020 as a primary endpoint, and so we know what it takes to get there. But again, we're not doing this in a vacuum. This slide shows some of our partners and some of the consortia and some of the different groups that we are deeply involved in, not only contributing to these groups, but also listening to these groups and learning, hey, where are the areas that we need to avoid? What are the questions that we need to be prepared to answer to support the evidence package that is expected? And you can see some of those partners that we talked to on the top right. But all this is rooted in a plan, and that plan starts with concept validation. What is the meaningful aspect of health? What are we trying to measure? What are we trying to do to make this patient's life better? The technical verification piece, bench testing that you saw Christine show today to ensure that the technology is going to work in a fit-for-purpose fashion. And then analytical and clinical validation to ensure that we're choosing the right algorithm and that we're putting it through the right amount of robust testing to ensure that it's going to work. And then further, alongside our partners, creating the clinical validation piece to ensure that it's going to be applicable to the population and disease that you're studying. So good. So thank you for taking time with us, everybody. I want to open it up to Q&A. And so I've seen a couple of questions come in here that I want to drop over to my team to answer. So let me pull up my paper here. Okay, so had a question from Eduardo, and it says, Christine, this will be directed to you, and I'm going to try to paraphrase. So it says, essentially, how does the endpoint validation process work? It says, what types of validation should we explore, and can a study team use these endpoints for drug labeling claims? So maybe a three-part question there.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy, and thanks, Eduardo, for the question. I think you typed this question before Jeremy showed the last slides. Hopefully that slides actually illustrate the kind of framework they're working with. And Jeremy, if you don't mind, maybe just go back to the last slides. As you can see here, validation, like you correctly pointed out, validation is a loaded word. There's many things that we're talking about validation. And the framework, we believe, especially we want to use the endpoint as a clinical outcome measure, is to making sure that the concept is valid. We're measuring something that is meaningful to the patient. And like Jeremy already elaborated, we have several processes to make sure the technical capability is valid, the software and hardware performance meet our standard, and also the algorithm perform as we expected from a measurement perspective, and then working with really you, the clinical team, to make sure that it deliver the right answer to you in answering whether the measurement can detect changes over time or to an intervention. So this is kind of the framework we have in mind. Our team is going to be very much focusing on analytical validation. As a vendor, we have an internal data science and statistical expert to help with that. The clinical validation would be a partnership between us and you as an expert around the clinical research. So this is sort of the, let's say, theoretical conceptual research framework we have in mind, but the real process started with a conversation with us. So this is perhaps what Jeremy will talk a little bit in the end. We'd love to kind of hear from you on what kind of problem you have and help you craft a validation pathway to support that discussion with the regulator. And to your last question, those are the conversations that have already happened. We are working with teams that has FDA endorsement to use our technology as primary endpoint in pivotal trials. And we're in many active discussions with the sponsor and the regulatory agencies in order to make that a reality for us to use digital measure for label claim and label extension.
Great, thank you, Christine. Another question from Amanda and Kim. I guess I'll start with you, and maybe Christine can just confirm this. But question says, is temperature sensing specifically for wearing validation? I'll make sure we can measure wear time, or does it tell actual body temperature, like fever detection?
So as I think Christine mentioned that basically we predominantly are going to use for wear temperature, but also some of the sleep algorithms. Are you asleep? You can basically tell them more if they're asleep or not. But it is an onboard temperature. It's not skin temperature. So I wouldn't use it for the actual fever detection.
Okay, thank you, Kim. All right, next question I got here is from Christian. It says, do you have additional sensors on your roadmap, maybe traditional vitals like heart rate or R2R or anything beyond that? And so I got to be a little bit careful here, but I will answer with a yes, and I can't say any more than that other than to say yes. And I think that our clients and you, our partners here, are going to be very excited about what's coming there, and we believe it's very dialed into the need of what we see here for these DCT studies. Okay, another question for Christine. Are there algorithms, this is from Andrea, are there algorithms for estimating physical activity levels in wrist-worn activity monitors?
Yes, and that's indeed is a big focus for us, is to especially be able to derive the measurement of interest from wrist wearing devices as opposed to hip wearing or waist wearing because of the burden from a patient perspective. So there are various things we're providing. Physical activity, I think, is something we've been doing for quite a few years. And we're also looking into be able to improve the accuracy on additional measures such as gait and posture using wrist-wearing devices.
Great, thank you, Christine. Question from Julia, and I'll tag team this with you, Kim. Question says, how do you decide what sensors to add to your technology to balance battery life and utility? Are you planning on adding PPG, heart rate, variability? Seems to be an upcoming parameter. So I just answered the second half of that question. That is certainly on our roadmap. The first question, I love this question because, Julia, you're asking the right question. What we don't want to do is we don't want to start and say, hey, we want to pick this wearable device or this particular consumer sensor or any sensor, and then figure out how to get it to answer the question that we're trying to get at for the patient's health. We want to start with what is the meaningful aspect of health. And so in our case, the reason we make wearables, I mean, we would love to find off-the-shelf wearables and use them, but we believe deeply in the need to configure these wearables to be very fit for purpose for the clinical study that we're performing. And so in our case, we do choose sensors, and we select our battery and we select the screen. All that is with fit for purpose in mind, around the integrity of the raw data that we collect, around the ability to turn sensors off for long periods of time to extend the battery life to minimize the burden on the patient. And so we do try to choose the sensors that make a lot of sense for the clinical study, and then we configure the wearable, and Kim can talk about how we do that, to perform it a certain way in the trial. Kim?
Yeah, no, so I think, Jeremy, you covered most of it, but yes, as Jeremy said, the fit for purpose is basically allowing us to configure each of the different sensors on the device. As you know, with our current devices, you can pick how many hertz you want to capture. This temperature sensor that we are adding in the onboard, you can choose to capture it every 4 seconds, 8 seconds, all the way up to 1 minute if you want to do that. So basically, any sensor we add in, there is configuration around that. We make sure for each of the sensors, we also have a calibration we talked about earlier, so you can guarantee the same result from every device, even though that there are some differences, you know, when they're produced. So that's why that part is very, very important too. So any additional questions on that, or is that covering it?
That was it. Thank you, Kim.
Okay.
Good. So we're past our 40-minute commitment here, so I want to be sure I respect everybody's time. There are a few questions, and we'll try to answer those afterwards, or if our team can type them in while I'm chatting here. But listen, at the beginning of the webinar, I said to you that, or I asked you the question, what's the biggest challenge? And you said, look, choosing the right algorithm and the right wearable and the combination of putting those in place. So for those of you who've hung on all the way to the end, I've got a special offer for you here. For the first 5 attendees to send us an email with consultation here, consulting, and I got to get it right from my marketing team, consulting in the subject line, and referencing this webinar, sending an email to webinars@theactigraph.com. We're going to give you a free 30-minute consultation with our scientific team to answer any questions that you might have around an upcoming study or a concept that you're looking at. And that's about a $300 offer there that we're going to bring and give you for free. First 5 people that will shoot an email our way with that in the subject line. Hopefully that'll give you guys an opportunity to just get ahead and answer some questions without having to get any budget dedicated to that. So we hope you'll take advantage of that offer there, and hopefully we can come alongside and help you. But on behalf of Christine and Kim, I want to thank you all for spending just 40 minutes here with us talking about what are we working on here and what's the purpose of what we're doing, and how can we help you be successful and be the smartest person in the room when it comes to wearable DCTs and wearable technology and clinical trials. That's our goal, and we hope we've helped you move closer to that today. And we look forward to seeing you in future events, and we're going to be intentional about bringing these up every quarter and showing you all where we're heading and what we're doing and what it's all about. So thank you all again for your time, and we look forward to talking to you soon.